Welcome to another edition of Inspired Stories, where leaders share their experiences so we can learn from their successes, how they've overcome adversity, and explore current challenges they're facing.
Welcome to another edition of the Inspired Stories podcast, where leaders share their experiences so we can learn from their successes and be inspired by how they've overcome adversity. My name is Anthony Codispoti, and today's guest is Micha Magid, co-founder and co-CEO of Mighty Quinn's BBQ, a restaurant that got its start at an outdoor food market in Brooklyn, New York, where they were doing smoked briskets and pulled pork on the back of a mobile pit attached to a truck. Seeing instant success validated that they were filling a gap in the city where it was hard to find authentic barbecue. That led them to open their first brick-and-mortar location in the East Village. 3 months later, they found themselves on the front cover of the New York Times dining section, and they were off to the races. We will hear how Micha made the transition from the whirlwind of Wall Street to slow-cooked meats. And before we get into all that good stuff, today's episode is brought to you by my company, Add Back Benefits Agency, where we offer very specific and unique employee benefits that are both great for your team and fiscally optimized for your bottom line. One recent client was able to add over $900 per employee per year in net profits by implementing one of our proprietary programs. Results vary for each company, and some organizations may not be eligible. To find out if your company qualifies, contact us today at addbackbenefitsagency.com. Now, back to our guest today, co-CEO, co-founder of Mighty Quinn's BBQ, Micha. I appreciate you making the time to share your story today.
Yeah, Anthony, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, so Micha, tell us, how did you go from working on Wall Street to starting barbecue restaurants?
Yeah, I guess it's not the most conventional path into the world of restaurants, but when I was on Wall Street, I was what was called a generalist investor. So we really, my fund invested across a diverse list of industries. And I always kind of gravitated towards the industries that touch the consumer, because as a consumer myself, I found it most efficient to understand the real kind of drivers of the business value as a customer of that business versus some areas like, chemical manufacturers, oil and gas businesses, where as a consumer, you don't really interact with as an end user. So having that end user exposure always kind of gravitated me towards consumer focused businesses. And I think that was kind of like my foray into things that were, consumer package facing, restaurant industry and other retail businesses. And so what happened was, my brother-in-law, Hugh, started smoking meats in Brooklyn. And at the time, I came in solely as an investor. But when we saw that what we were doing really had some legs to it, myself and my two other partners really decided to focus on Mighty Quinn's full time.
And so it started basically as a food truck, right?
Yeah, not so much a food truck, because we we weren't serving out of a truck. We had a mobile pit, which is basically dragged behind the truck. So a little bit of a different nuance there. So if you think about kind of the pit next to a 10 by 10 tent, we had all the meats already smoked, obviously, because some of these things take, upwards of a day to finish. And so we would open up at 11, we had lines down the block and basically just kind of served barbecue for 5 or 6 hours until we sold out on the weekends.
And so were you doing any kind of special promotions or advertising?
No, well, the odor off the pit is kind of like your 2-block free advertising, right? Those smells just kind of permeate everywhere. So I think people knew that where we were serving was somewhat of a weekend food destination. So people were already coming to discover new and interesting things. So that was really the marketing done for us. So the crowds were already at the market, and I think they just gravitated towards, what we're doing with, live fire smoking always attracts a crowd.
And your brother-in-law, Hugh, did he have a background in this, or was he just kind of started doing it for fun on the side, and friends and family were like, "Oh, this tastes good. You should sell this to people"?
That's a good question. He's a classically trained chef. So, cut his teeth in some formal restaurant environments. And I think, having a dad with some Houston lineage led him down the path of barbecue. And so, as most chefs are artists and they experiment with different things, this barbecue thing kind of clicked, and we were off to the races from there.
And so how long were you operating the food truck before you were like, man, we're really onto something. We should take this leap into a brick and mortar location?
Yeah, the outdoor markets were running for about a couple of years, but after the first year is when we really hit the pavement to find that first brick and mortar location. We knew it would take a while to find a place that we could, smoke in a restaurant environment in the city. And so that probably took us the better part of a year to lock down a spot that we were happy with.
Is that because there's special permits required to smoke meats?
I mean, there's logistic challenges. Bringing a 6,000-pound pit into a restaurant. So, you need load capacity on the floor. You need to be able to vent per code, like you just pointed out. And in a way that's not going to affect, the neighbors or anybody else in the building. So, and at the same time, you also, as a new brand, you want that great visibility, right? So you don't want to find yourself in, an off the beaten path, hard to find location. We really wanted to find a place where we can kind of plant a flag and say, barbecue is here, Mighty Quinn's is here, come try us out. And we did that by finding a great corner location in the East Village.
And there just wasn't much in the way of good barbecue in the city at the time?
There was definitely barbecue in the city, but I think it wasn't as accessible as we thought it should be. There were more kind of sit-down restaurants, where you're committing an hour and a half. We wanted a more casual place where people can come, get meats at a counter and get out of there. They can hang out over beers for an hour or two. We really wanted to have that kind of convenience factor tied into this amazing cuisine category. And that dynamic we thought didn't really exist in the city.
Where does the name Mighty Quinn's come from?
So Quinn is Hugh's eldest son. It was named after him. And just given the brand recognition, we went with it as we opened up into brick and mortar.
Okay. So you guys are operating out of a food truck. You guys are selling out consistently. So was it profitable pretty early on, even as not a food truck, but yeah. You had a pit that you drug behind the truck.
Exactly, the mobile pit. Yeah, the economics of the business were great because we had what seemed at the time to be just we could fulfill as much demand as we could possibly supply for. So that's kind of a nice dynamic to have. The more we made, the more we sold. And I think that at the time, coming into the city as a brick and mortar restaurant, we weren't really competing with many people. If you think about it, you're opening a new Italian joint or a sushi joint or really Mexican, all these categories are so competitive. We really felt we were one of one or one or two in our area. If you want a barbecue, you're coming to us. So that was a nice little protected moat that we thought was exciting.
Okay, so you go through all this work to find a location. There's probably a pretty significant investment for the build out. You open this new location. 3 months later, you guys are on the cover of the New York Times dining section?
Yeah. So
how did that come about?
I think that, the team at the Times, they do their thing. I don't know how they discover, how they pick who they pick. But we were fortunate enough to be on that list. One of the reviewers, Pete Wells, came in and had an amazing experience. And the cool thing about that review is that, we're serving food on like disposable plates, right? This is barbecue. This is not white tablecloths, porcelain dishware and whatnot. So he saw past all that and really just rated us on the food. And, we had an amazing 2.5-star review from him. And, we found out really the day the morning it hit. And, me as kind of new to the restaurant industry was kind of like, oh, cool. We got a nice review, but, my partners who are more experienced are like, oh shit, this is kind of like the Academy Awards of opening a restaurant. Like we just won. So I was like, okay, interesting. And then of course, after that, we had, lines down the block and we're selling out at 8 o'clock and, really saw momentum pick up.
And was that like overnight, like the review shows up, Sunday and then Sunday night or Monday, like the lines start forming around the block?
Yeah, I think it was actually published midweek because I remember still being on the trading desk at the time. And it was literally the next day was the transformation to, crazy demand.
And so at this time, you were still keeping your day job. Was there a point where you made a transition into full time?
Yeah, there was. I was on Wall Street for 10 years in different capacities. On the banking side, on the hedge fund side, and I just really thought that what Mighty Quinn's was doing was unique, and that the brand had legs to expand beyond just one location. And so I think it was just a mixture of being excited by doing something different, and also jumping into something that kind of already tested the waters and proved successful. The combination of those two things led me to leave the hedge fund that I was at the time and focus on Mighty Quinn's full time with my two partners.
And when did that transition take place?
That was like I would say mid 2013.
Okay. And how many locations did you have at that point? Was it still just the one?
It was just the one. It was just the one. And we still had our weekend pop up in Brooklyn. So it's really just that was a seasonal location and then our main location.
And so you came in full time. You're like, I see where this is going. There's a lot of growth opportunity here. And so where are your energies focused now?
Yeah, so now it's kind of we've evolved into a bigger company with a franchise business and licensing business. I would say, aside from kind of strategic oversight, more kind of on the finance and marketing side and the development side, we're trying to understand in this very dynamic restaurant environment, where fast casual is headed, where barbecue is headed, what returns look like on new store build outs, and based on that kind of return profile, where we should be looking and how we should be expanding. So I would say that the job is now very dynamic because we're in a very dynamic market. If there's ever, an industry that is constantly changing, ironically, it's restaurants, even though it's probably one of the oldest businesses, to exist. It always keeps us on our toes.
You say it's very dynamic, constantly change, like constantly evolving. What about the industry do you see that it is sort of is constantly changing?
Yeah, sure. So if you think about just 10 years ago, you opened a restaurant with a dining room to serve your guests at a table. And now a meaningful percentage of basically all fast casual business is done digitally. And so those customers often never even step foot in your restaurant, right? So if you think about just the math behind, real estate selection, build out, how you configure your restaurants to accommodate people who are just picking up food and not sitting to eat, or third-party couriers, it's a very different thing. And so we've had to adjust by, we've had these restaurants that existed for, our oldest restaurants are, 10 plus years old at this point. We've had to, renovate and redo the way that the restaurant flows to accommodate this huge new digital impact.
And when you say digital impact, you're talking about like Uber Eats, Grubhub, like
Yeah,
these delivery services?
that's one component. Third-party delivery is one component, but then you also have our own native web ordering solutions on our own app, right? So which can accommodate both delivery and takeout. So again, you design a restaurant for someone to come order, sit down and eat, and now we're receiving an order through a tablet, to a guest who's probably has not even stepped foot in the restaurant, or there's a potential that they haven't even stepped foot in the restaurant. They're just probably, it could be a delivery only customer. It could be a takeout only customer. So just serving that guest is a much different thought process, right, than knowing that they're eating and sitting down to eat.
And so as you are looking at new store locations, does the footprint change under this new dynamic of fewer people sort of coming in to sit down?
Yeah, absolutely. To accommodate the same, we call it AUVs, the average unit volume of a store, you now need less real estate because you don't have to have the seats to hit that revenue number. So we want to think about things like very fast throughput from when an order gets received to when it's put in the bag and ready to be picked up. We have to focus more on minimizing order errors if you're forgetting something in that bag, being the guest is not there to see it with their own eyes. And speed is important, right? If someone's ordering, they're doing it because it's a convenient way to get food, and you don't want them to be waiting, more than 30 or 45 minutes to get that delivered to their home. So there's a lot more KPIs that are different now than they were when we opened 10 years ago.
Now, you mentioned that your brother-in-law, Hugh, is a classically trained chef. So that really helped initially, right, to establish, excuse me, really delicious food that people were attracted to. But what you're describing to me now is a lot of really intense, operational tweaking.
Yeah.
Did anybody in your partnership group there have the experience of sort of that operational side of the restaurant business that they were able to apply? Or is this something that you've just kind of been learning as you go?
Well, we kind of had a cool partnership at the outset. It was Hugh and our other partner, Christos Gormos. He came from the restaurant industry. He'd been in restaurant and catering halls basically his whole career. So he came in with that operational experience. Hugh came in on the food side, and I kind of came in with everything else. But none of us had the experience of how you transition to 100% seated dinners to 60% of your revenue being in the restaurant and 30 to 40% being digital, right? So that was the learning process that I think the entire organization goes through. And, while we had the foresight we were early on in developing our digital and our web presence for ordering. It certainly was a learning curve to make sure that we're doing it correctly.
Were there any, I don't know, resources or mentors that have been helpful to you in sort of wrapping your head around the sort of the KPIs and the metrics and the operational aspects that you guys, need to kind of level up on?
Yeah, not at the time that all this was happening. A few years ago, we brought on some institutional capital. We have a formal board now with guys who are, have a lot of restaurant experience. But when this was all taking place in kind of the 2016 to 2019 period, it was really kind of like a testing environment in terms of figuring out what works, what didn't work. It wasn't so much that we had a playbook to go by from somebody else who had gone through this, because the whole industry was going through this basically at the same time.
I'm looking at your website, which is Mighty Quinns with an S, BBQ.com. And the store locations are really cool looking, both the interior and the exterior. Did you guys have some outside help in designing these spaces? I mean, you're in the fast casual space, kind of like a Chipotle, but this feels a little more refined. It feels like a little bit of a step up.
Well, I appreciate you noticing that. Thank you. When we designed the first location, we said, okay, we want this to feel like a timeless restaurant. We didn't want you to feel like you came in and were being pitched some kind of hokey version of barbecue with, license plates on the walls and all the kind of things that you think about are like stereotypical of like your barbecue place down south. We just wanted a kind of comfortable, minimalist, timeless location that 10 years later would still feel kind of relevant. And so that was the foundation of the restaurant design. And have obviously made updates and changes as we've evolved in different formats and sizes and locations. But for the most part, we kind of try to stay true to that ethos of let's just build something that feels comfortable and authentic, and not something that feels, like you're overly marketing the food category in a way that's not real.
How many locations do you guys have now?
Yeah, between the franchise, corporate, and licensed locations, we're about 17 right now.
Okay. And you guys are in New Jersey, New York, Maryland, Florida?
Yeah, Maryland will open later this year. Our first Florida location did open at the end of 22 in Tampa. That's also our first drive-through location. So that was pretty cool. Another example of, figuring things out in real time. Having a whole new sales distribution channel, selling through a window was an exciting opportunity for us. And we were happy that the franchisee found this amazing location. And so now we have, the drive-through sales channel is another kind of arsenal in the AUV toolbook or toolkit to drive sales in new locations.
What have you learned from that drive-through experience?
Speed has never been more important, right? Once someone places that order, the clock is ticking and they are literally waiting, sitting there, staring at a window for the food to come out. It's a little bit different than when you're trying to get an order out for delivery quickly because the person's at home. It's not like they're not sitting there staring at their front door waiting for the doorbell to ring. So in this case, it was really just figuring out how to dial in the process even further to get that order out as quickly as possible.
Were those lessons then that you're able to apply to your more traditional locations that don't have drive-through, where you can still shave seconds off, or did you kind of leave that refinement just for the location with the drive-through?
Yeah, the refinement was definitely for the drive-through. Tampa is a little bit of a different market. It's hotter year-round, so the beverage sales are higher. So we have its own dedicated beverage station for the drive-through. So there's certain things that exist in Florida that are not really relevant for the New York market. So I think they're kind of their own two different things.
Do you see doing more drive-through locations?
It's super competitive now. Whenever you have a great drive-through location come up, the big brands are all over it. So, you're competing with guys with much bigger balance sheets than we have. We got lucky down in Tampa because it was a little bit of a project to get this building kind of turned around and alive again. It was an old bakery that has been closed for some time. So, going forward, we're definitely looking for them, but we know, the Class A real estate drive-through locations, they don't last long and often don't even hit the market.
Got it. And what's the growth projection now, Micha? Like what's on the horizon? Are there more corporate-owned locations coming? Are there more franchises? What can we expect?
Yeah, really both. So we're working on getting our first location open in Connecticut, which is going to be another pivot for us, and that will be a full service location with a full bar. So we're kind of tweaking the menu to accommodate that new format. And then we have a bunch of franchise locations opening, 2 in Maryland, 4 down in the Tampa area. And so the team is really focused on just executing this next, 5 to 7 locations. That's our focus right now. We're not really looking at growth right now beyond that, because when you go from 17 to 25 or 26 or 24, that's a big lift, and we want to make sure we execute correctly.
So the location in Connecticut with a full bar, this is a bit of a different approach, right? Because I'm hearing you say that a lot of these locations, you're getting less sit-down business, right? More takeout, more delivery.
Yep.
And now with a full bar, now you're even more so inviting people to come in and kind of, park it in a seat for a little while.
Yeah.
What's sort of behind this thought process?
Yeah, it's a great question. So if you look at the growth of Mighty Quinn's, our real estate has not been very formulaic in that one looks like the other. We've really opened up different location sizes and formats depending on the market. So we have a 680 square foot location down on Wall Street with just communal seating as part of a food hall. We have a 3,500 square foot restaurant in Clifton with 100 seats, right? So very different. And in this instance, we found a neighborhood where people are kind of going to this very specific dining district to hang out and enjoy their evening. And so we don't feel that the fast casual format would really maximize our potential in this market. So we want to also accommodate the atmosphere at the bar, the relaxed vibe. There's also going to be a small game room in this location. So it's really about fitting the format and the service style to the region. And in this case, we feel like we've kind of linked those two together correctly by having a more full service offering.
Is that a bit difficult on your brain? Like there, I would think there's a part of you that sort of wants to come up with a cookie cutter approach so that it's easier to stamp out each time. But what you guys are doing, it's a lot more work, right? You've got to look at each location and treat it uniquely and differently.
Yeah, part of me wishes there could be a cookie cutter solution, but in our markets, and that does work for barbecue in certain markets, right? That the same, 2,000 square feet with cafeteria style service or full fast casual service format. In the Northeast, where we're finding opportunities, it's just different, and we don't want to be beholden to the cookie cutter format because it's easier to execute. We want to find a strategy that maximizes the revenue and value of the brand. And so doing it this way, it's a little harder, but we do think that it's right. We're putting round pegs in round holes and not trying to force a format that we don't think will be successful in the area. And so it kind of is what it is. We do have people that we're bringing on with deep experience and full service format and the bar business to be kind of partners with us in this location. So I think we set the foundation up correctly to be successful.
And I think this would be actually really cool from a customer perspective too. Somebody becomes a fan of a Mighty Quinn's barbecue restaurant, and they're traveling. They're in either a different part of New York City or they're traveling in a different part of the country. And I love their food. The quality of the food isn't going to change, but the dining experience may be a little bit different. Let's go check it out and see how it's a little bit different here.
Yeah, 100%. Look, our culinary team is so talented. They do an amazing job, but at the same time, they're still kind of fenced into this fast casual format service style, right? Which limits what we can do. And now if you take that same amazing skill set and transfer it into a full kitchen with grills, flat tops, fryers, everything that we need to create a broader menu, I think people are going to really be impressed with the product we're putting on the table, because now these guys have the ability to really no longer be kind of fenced in to fast casual format parameters, and really we can do whatever we want. And I think the food is going to be truly phenomenal.
So sometimes when I talk to newer franchisors that are expanding, sometimes they run into supply chain issues as they go a little bit further out geographically. So you'll see traditionally a franchise sort of start, in New York, for example. New Jersey's not a big deal. You can kind of ship all your, different foods and your ingredients in a region there. But now you're expanding to Maryland. Now you're expanding to Florida. Were there any issues that you've run into there on the supply chain side?
No, we set up our supply chain obviously knowing that we're expanding into new areas. And so by virtue of that, we only teamed up with national suppliers. So the guys that we partner with, they can facilitate, deliveries in really any major market. So we feel, and the deals that we have with on the product side is also with national producers. So in terms of supply chain, I think we're fairly dialed in. It's not an issue.
Now, you mentioned you're, 17 going to 25 locations. Like that is sort of all the further that you're looking at the moment. But, what do you think things look like in the next few years? Are you're looking for more franchisees? Are you looking at other geographies? What's sort of the thought process here? Is that too far down the road to really think about?
Well, we have to think about it because it's important as we're trying to, maximize the value of the company to think about kind of a longer term plan. But right now, when you're kind of, when you're hiking up a mountain and the mountain's very steep, you don't really care what's on the other side of that mountain. And that's where we're at right now. But I will say that we're also keeping our eyes open to seeing what the market looks like. I think over just the past few months, we've seen a lot of, I would call it, chaos in some of the multi-unit restaurant groups. Some, filing for bankruptcy, others getting acquired. I think there's going to be a lot of opportunity to expand in a non-traditional way. Mighty Quinn's right now, we're really looking mostly at second generation spaces that we're taking over to renovate versus, 6-7 years ago, we were starting with, a concrete shell from nothing. So we're just, we're focused on the growth for this year and next year, and we are mindful of keeping our eyes open to seeing what opportunities present themselves in the market.
Along those lines, I found an article online that mentioned in early 2023 that you made a strategic investment in Detroit-based Slows Barbecue.
Yes.
Tell me more about how that came about.
Yeah, so one of the interesting things about fast casual barbecue, I guess barbecue in general, is there is no nationally recognized barbecue chain, right? There's no Shake Shack of barbecue, right? There's regionally strong multi-unit players who are probably number one or number two in their markets. And we kind of have to step back and say, okay, why is that, right? Why can't there become a nationally recognized go-to spot for this category? And the reason is a fewfold. First off, there are some regional styles, but I think that's kind of like a secondary issue. The main issue is like these brands come up and they become the go-to spots for their market. They're loved locally. And time again, we see them try to expand into new markets and often fail. And so we're very mindful of this category being very successful in a small regional basis. It doesn't have to be one state or city, but a cluster of states or a cluster of markets where the company really has lineage and history. And so we thought that, and I think the kind of growth path for us going forward is potentially also on the acquisition side, whereby we fold other successful barbecue chains under our umbrella, not to rebrand them, but just to get the benefits of scale through common ownership while maintaining individually successful brands. So I think that's going to be a big value driver for the category, I think, going forward.
And so where does that scale come into play? Is it supply chain? Is it like back office administrative stuff? Is it other?
Supply chain is a big component of that. If you think about barbecue restaurants, we're buying 80 to 90% of all the same proteins. You're buying racks of ribs and chickens and briskets. And so being able to scale up on those volumes allows you to get some pricing benefit, but also consistency of supply as you become kind of a bigger player. So there's purchasing synergies, and there's also, I think, a more subjective best practices synergy opportunity, whereby we have a collective playbook of how brands have gone from 1 to 10 to 20. And I think there's a lot of learning in that history that can be applied to other brands. And so while we think we can be helpful in maximizing AUV, the sales of these brand portfolios and minimizing their costs on the purchasing side, there's probably also a lot of things that can be implemented to just improve operational excellence. And by virtue of that, all these brands become stronger, can probably grow faster. And maybe that allows them to get to a better kind of valuation for themselves over the long term. And if we can do that under a common ownership umbrella, then I think that's where the real opportunity lies.
So as somebody who's never been into one of your restaurants, all I can do is, look at your website, listen to your story, and I'm like, wow, this is really cool. Like it's a neat brand. The stores are really interesting. Talk to me about the food side of things. Clearly, that's been a really important part of your success. What are you guys doing that's different from other barbecue restaurants that, had you selling out from your first food market experience, and then 3 months after you open, to win the Academy Awards of a food review?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. I think that when we've started the franchise business, we wanted to make as much as we're make as many of the steps in food preparation and service as possible to be almost formulaic, right? Just to leave as little room for error on getting an amazing piece of meat out of the pit and onto the plate. And I think that by teaching our system, you can create an end product that's probably far superior than just the one-off chef who's kind of eyeballing things, and without him the restaurant fails because there's no consistency. So we really try to set franchisees up for serving a consistent product, but also giving them the operational tools to make it a viable business by minimizing waste, knowing what products to purchase and how much to purchase. Really the whole playbook of why people kind of, sign up with franchise businesses, because all of that hard work has already been figured out. And so if you look at, like, for example, our last new market down in Tampa, these guys are about to hit a 4.7, star rating on Google with, 700 plus reviews. And I think like it's slowly becoming like the spot to go to for authentic barbecue as more people discover it and have a similar, amazing experience inside our restaurant. And that's the drafty one that I mentioned.
So you guys have been around for several years, meaning that you guys were around before COVID, during COVID, and thankfully, not all brands were able to say this after COVID. What was it like trying to navigate that uncertain time period there in the middle?
Obviously, super challenging. I think a lot of our decision making was based on sitting back and watching the broader restaurant market respond to this pandemic. No one had a playbook, obviously, and you constantly are sitting there making decisions, often second guessing decisions. But I think at the end of the day, COVID made us kind of minimize the business in terms of really understanding what's the foundational necessities to keep Mighty Quinn's going. And right, that was kind of our new starting point. And so there's a lot of businesses that we had to pull back from, a few restaurants that we had to close. But I think coming out of that, we had a kind of a more startup mentality in that we knew that people had to start wearing multiple hats and working collectively to, for the greater good of the business, and not kind of siloed doing specific tasks. And so I think for everyone, it was a learning curve adapting to that new reality. But as we sit here, 4 years later, 3.5 years later, I think we're in a better place with an amazing team, many of whom have been with us since COVID. And we're super excited about the future. The only way restaurant groups can grow is by having, the team in place that is really the engine behind that growth. And I think we have a solid crew that's, shared that mission.
Micha, aside from the COVID experience, which was truly challenging on its own, what's another serious challenge, either on a personal or professional side, that you had to overcome, and some of the lessons maybe that you learned coming through the other side of it?
Yeah, it's funny, coming from a Wall Street background, you're basically staring at the market all day, right? So from 9:30 to 4 o'clock, stocks are trading up, stocks are trading down, and you can kind of measure your success based on your portfolio picks doing well or not, right? So at the end of the day, you're either an idiot or a genius, right? Depending on how your portfolio did. And so for me, coming to the restaurant business, it was a much slower response environment. If we launched a new menu item or did some strategic on the marketing side, it wasn't that instantaneous, am I right or wrong? So teaching myself that patience to let kind of these new initiatives play out and let the market digest them and get true data points was a much longer kind of time horizon than being in the stock market where you're kind of validated almost immediately. And you could also change your mind immediately, which is very different than the restaurant business.
It's a totally different pace of feedback.
Exactly. The feedback loop is much longer. And when you're kind of in the public markets, you always know that if you're wrong, you can just sell something. And in the restaurant business, it's like, make that real estate decision. It's a 10-year lease. There's a lot more work that goes involved into making sure that that's the correct decision. And you're not always right.
Is there still a part of you that is having trouble with that transition from instant feedback, sell it if it's not working, to, man, we got to think long-term. You're making a long-term commitment, a long-term decision, and it's going to take a little while before you get some feedback on if it's working.
I think I've been conditioned enough now over the past 10 years to know that things are not instantaneous, and being patient is often kind of the best recipe to figure out if you're right or wrong.
As business owners, we're always got our eye on the bottom line, right? And there's sort of two ways that we can kind of make that number move, right? We can pull this lever up and we can increase sales. We can pull this lever down and we can, decrease expenses. I'm curious if you've got any examples of maybe some creative ideas that you've tried to move either one of those levers.
Yeah, it goes back to what I was talking about with the restaurant industry always being a dynamic market. It's always changing. I think as we're coming into a slowing economy, people are much more value conscious. And so they want to make sure they're getting great value for their money. And so for a few of our locations, we're actually now testing out dinner and lunch specials. So we're very, traffic is a huge KPI to us. We want always to see that the people coming in the door growing faster than it was the prior year, versus other things like, check average or check size. So, offering something that we think is very competitive on the value side is interesting. So we just launched this test. It's in week 2. So far there's some interesting tea leaves that are presenting themselves. But again, that'll take, another 4 to 6 weeks to really understand the impact of doing something like that.
Interesting. And you've got some sort of a data tracking system on the back end that's feeding into a bigger decision engine to help you guys understand what it is that's going on.
Yeah, the tech stack in the restaurant industry is super important. So we have, our POS system, which feeds into our ERP, which is our kind of broad accounting and operations management platform. So through the reporting function of that, we can see, by day, what items are selling at what locations. And that's in essence the data tracking tool.
Micha, in a competitive job market like we have right now, recruiting and retaining good folks is really challenging. I'm curious if you've tried anything creative or different that you found particularly effective in there.
Yeah, so not something I'm directly responsible for, but our operations team has definitely been leaning into some AI filters that have helped them on the hiring side. And so these filters, in essence, allowed us to look at the job candidate pool and make it a much more efficient hiring process by increasing the show rates for interviews, and also just the caliber of employee that they're talking to is far superior. So this is kind of a new technology, but so far I think they've had positive results with it.
Oh, that's fascinating. I haven't heard people talk about that yet. And so it's sort of putting an AI layer over top of resumes or applications that you're reviewing, and somehow it's supposed to help determine if these folks are more likely to show up, more likely to be, good workers.
Yeah, and it's not solely just like a data analytic platform where it's reading resume data. It's also, I think, doing some pre-screening for us, which is, automatically filtering out people who are maybe not that interested in the position. And so, it's a very time-intensive thing to find the right person and hire them. So we're able to reduce the applicant pool by 50%, and those 50% are people that maybe weren't going to be showing up for the interview, or there's a very high no-show rate in restaurant interviews, or just didn't have the right experience for the job. That saves us a ton of time, and so it makes the hiring process much more efficient.
Any numbers that you're aware of off the top of your head in terms of turnovers reduced by this much, or number of no-shows to interviews this much?
Yeah, well, I can't say that it's solely a function of our new hiring process, but our turnover is down by about 30% year over year.
Wow.
And so that's super important. I think that's also just a factor of us promoting from within and people staying on longer with the company.
That's a significant number.
Yeah.
That's quite an improvement. Micha, what's something you wish you could teach a younger version of yourself? Something that seems so obvious now that if you knew this 15, 20 years ago, life would have been easier.
Just put all your money in Apple stock and go to the beach. That would have been the best advice. I don't know, I kind of I never thought that, graduating from, undergrad business school and working on Wall Street would lead me to the restaurant industry. But I think it's important just to, when, in any job that you're in, kind of, it's a job, but it's also your next iteration of education, and you're always learning things, and just having kind of an open mind to understand that there may be things you discover that pull you away from your preconceived plans. That roadmap of your life often has many forks in it. And I think as we're all, younger people, we think it's just a straight shot to our goal, to our dream, but there's a lot of veering and turning. And I think, if you're more open-eyed to that phenomenon, I think you'll be ready to make those important decisions when those, changing opportunities present themselves.
Was there any sort of an identity, I don't know, crisis might be a strong word, but confusion when you're this, Wall Street guy, and now you're going into, slow cooked meats? Was there like wait a minute, that's not who I am. That's not who I was. That's not who I thought I was going to be. It kind of seems like a little bit of what you're touching on.
Not really. I never thought about it as like that transition. It's more, going from one business, which is investing, to another business, which is brand building. So, obviously what we're, the day to day is meaningfully different. And, in one version you have customers and the other version you don't. But no, it hasn't been that black and white for me, where it's like this jarring change. And I think that having the right people around us, especially me coming into the industry with partners who already had the experience, it wasn't such a crazy thing.
Micha, as you think about your own personal development or professional development, I'm curious if there were specific mentors or books or learning experiences that were particularly formative for you.
Yeah, I would say the best business books are the ones that are not business books. And I'll give you an example. I think the last one I read was by Rick Rubin, the record producer. I think it's called A Creative Act, or A Way of Being, something like that. And in the book, he just talks about the way that his artists have been influenced and where they get their inspiration from, and also the creative process, and how that process has to be nurtured in a certain way to get the output, which is the best-selling song, right? And so when I read this book, it's just like business accolade after business accolade. Understanding the source of your inspiration. Why are you doing this? How is it going to be successful? How is what you're doing going to talk to somebody in a way that they're going to tell their friends about it? And so for me, those type of books, I think, are invaluable. Rick Rubin's was one. There was another book that I read about, I forgot, I'm blanking on the author. He's an Irish guy. There was a story about, there's a little bit of science fiction. There's a story about, there's a dinner party. And at the dinner party, everyone's giving the cover of a newspaper from the future with a story about their life specifically. And they each see an opportunity to take advantage of that data point a year in advance. And like, for example, one talks about, a stock that's quadrupled. One talks about, a ship that went down and maybe that person was supposed to be on that ship. And in each case, they fail to have any benefit from knowing that story in advance, right? So through all these different convoluted things that happen, the thing that they thought was going to either save their life or make them rich, it didn't work out that way. So, the takeaway from a story like that is we think that we can identify the endpoint, and so we know the road to get to that endpoint, but oftentimes so many things happen that kind of knock you off your path. And I think being mindful of those things is super important. So I love those books that are not necessarily business books, but you get a lot of kind of business wisdom from.
It's interesting listening to you sort of describe those. It's like, I'm trying to think of how to sort of frame both of them together, because it's almost like there's one lesson over here, but the way your brain works, you're able to then twist it and apply it to the specific business challenges that you're working through at the moment.
100%. So there's those books, but there's also, I just love also, there's just pure straight up business autobiographies. Brad Jacobs, the roll up expert, just put out a book, something like, I think it was called, How to Make Your First $1 billion, some kind of like a kind of cheesy on purpose title, but just an amazing story about how he built all the various businesses that he was a part of again and again and again. It kind of takes away that, right place, right time thesis of people being successful when you see someone can do it, 6 consecutive times, right? So the straight up, business stories I also enjoy reading about.
If you think of the name of that sci-fi book, let me know and we'll put it in the show notes for everybody. That sounds like an interesting. Yeah. Micha, I just have one more question for you, but before I ask it, I want to do 2 things. First of all, if you're listening today and you like today's content, please hit the subscribe, like, or share button on your favorite podcast app. Also, Micha, I want to let everybody know the best way to get in touch with you. What would that be?
I guess it's easiest to find me on LinkedIn. Just my name, Micha Magid. The only one of me. You'll find
and Micha, for everybody who's listening and doesn't have access to the show notes, where we will include a link to his LinkedIn profile. Micha is Micha and Magid is Magid. Okay, so last question for you, Micha. I'm curious, how do you see your business evolving in, say, the next 5 to 10 years? What do you think the big changes are that are coming?
So for us, if we're executing correctly, I think we'll be open in a few new markets that we're already talking about, and hopefully expanding into those markets. And then we would also have been successful in maybe acquiring some other brands that are kind of doing their own thing in non-competitive areas that, we can execute that mission of scaling up to success and, through acquisition.
And so the acquisition play for you may be very well outside of the barbecue space.
No, I think we're going to stick within the category, because to really get the benefits of scale, we need to have all the things that we already talked about, the purchasing benefits, the operational skill experience being transferred, the knowledge transfer. So all of those components, I think, need to, be in place for this to work. And by virtue of that, it means that we're all in the same, category.
And so when you say non-competitive, you mean not in the same geography then?
Yeah, we're not going to look at a portfolio of restaurants that competes with something else that we already own.
Makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Well, hey, Micha, I want to be the first one to thank you for sharing both your time and your story today. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me. Great questions. I enjoyed the conversation.
Appreciate that. Folks, that's a wrap on another episode of the Inspired Stories podcast. Thanks for learning with us today.